Brenda Spencer. A reporter called the house while the shooting was still happening. He asked her why, and she said, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." On the morning of January 29, 1979, 16-year-old Brenda Spencer loaded a rifle, sat by her front window, and began firing across the street at Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego. Children were waiting for the gates to open, and she shot 8 of them. She started with 9-year-old Cam Miller, because he was wearing blue, her favorite color. Principal Burton Ragg ran outside to help, but she killed him. Custodian Mike Suture tried to drag Ragg to safety. She killed him too. A police officer was hit in the neck. 36 rounds, 15 minutes, then she barricaded herself inside. The phone rang. A reporter from the San Diego Tribune had been calling houses near the school looking for witnesses. Spencer picked up the phone. He asked her if she could see the shooting, and she said, "Who do you think's doing the shooting?" Spencer lived with her father in a house littered with empty bottles. They shared a single mattress on the floor. Staff at her school had flagged her as suicidal. A psychiatrist recommended she be admitted to a mental hospital, but her father refused. That Christmas, she asked for a radio. Instead, he gave her a Ruger semi-automatic rifle with a telescopic sight and 500 rounds of ammunition. She later said, "He bought the rifle so I would kill myself." She surrendered after a 7-hour standoff. Once negotiators promised her a Burger King meal. Spencer pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 25 years to life, denied parole 6 times. She's still in prison. She is considered the first modern school shooter in American history. At her 2001 hearing, she said something no one expected. "With every school shooting, I feel I'm partially responsible. What if they got the idea from what I did?" Lionel Tate. He was 12 years old, and he said he was just copying what he saw on TV. On the night of July 28, 1999, Lionel Tate was left alone with 6-year-old Tiffany Unick in his family's living room in Broward County, Florida. His mother was upstairs. The TV was on. Professional wrestling. She called down and told them to be quiet. 45 minutes later, Lionel came upstairs and said Tiffany wasn't breathing. She wasn't just not breathing. Her skull was fractured. Her liver was lacerated. She had a broken rib, a swollen brain, and bruises across her legs, feet, and neck. Over 35 separate injuries. Doctors compared the force to being hit by a car. Tiffany was just 6, and Lionel was 12. He said he was imitating wrestling moves from television. He didn't mean to hurt her, but no wrestling move fractures a skull. No accident lacerates a liver, and no 12-year-old inflicts 35 injuries on a 6-year-old without knowing exactly what he's doing. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder. The judge called his actions cold, callous, and indescribably cruel. Lionel Tate became the youngest person in modern American history sentenced to life without parole. He was only 13. The sentence was overturned in 2004. His mental competency had never been evaluated before trial. He took a plea deal for second-degree murder, time served, and 10 years probation. Then he walked free. But 1 year later, he held up a pizza delivery man at gunpoint. He was sentenced to 30 years. The judge told him, "You've run out of chances. You do not get any more." Tate is still in prison. The wrestling defense made headlines around the world. But Tiffany Unick, the 6-year-old with 35 injuries who never got to grow up, barely made a footnote. Thompson and Venables. 38 people saw them walking with the toddler, but nobody stopped them. On February 12, 1993, 2 10-year-old boys walked into the New Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle, England. They were skipping school. They spent the afternoon shoplifting sweets, batteries, and a can of blue paint. At some point, they started watching children. One of them later said they had a plan: find a small child and lead him to the busy road outside. At 3:42, CCTV captured them taking 2-year-old James Bulger by the hand and leading him out of the shopping center. His mother had let go for a few seconds to pay at the butcher's counter. Thompson and Venables walked James 2.5 miles across Liverpool. He was crying. They told anyone who asked that he was their little brother. 38 people saw them, but almost nobody intervened. They led him to a railway line. What happened next took investigators weeks to reconstruct. They threw blue paint into his eyes. They kicked him. They stomped on him. They threw bricks and stones at his body. They forced batteries into his mouth. They even dropped a 22-pound iron bar on his head. The pathologist counted 42 separate injuries, but none could be identified as the fatal blow. They laid his body across the tracks, weighed his head down with rubble, and then left. A train severed him in 2. He was found 2 days later. Thompson and Venables were just 10 years old. They became the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. They served 8 years. They were released at 18 with new identities and lifetime anonymity. Venables has been sent back to prison twice since, both times for possessing child sexual abuse images. James Bulger was just 2 years old. He held Venables' hand the entire walk, thinking they were taking him home. Eric Smith. He was riding his bike to summer camp. So was the boy he killed. On August 2, 1993, 13-year-old Eric Smith was heading to a recreation program in the small town of Savona in New York. 4-year-old Derek Roby was walking to the same place, alone for the first time. His mother let him go. It was just 1 block, with no streets to cross. He kissed her and said, "I love you, Mom." But he never arrived. Smith lured him into a patch of woods. He strangled him until he passed out, dropped a large rock on his head, sodomized him with a stick. Then, he opened Derek's lunchbox, took out a container of Kool-Aid and poured it into the wounds. Then he arranged the body. He removed the sneakers and placed them next to opposite hands. Derek was just 4 years and 10 months old. 4 days later, Smith walked into the police command center and offered to help solve the case. Investigators said he was upbeat, happy, and didn't want the conversation to end. He was sitting in front of the people looking for the killer. His family eventually sat him down, and he broke. "I'm sorry, Mom. I killed that little boy." Smith had been bullied for years, for his ears, his red hair, and his glasses. When asked at a parole hearing if killing Derek felt good, he said, "At the moment it did, yes." When asked if he would have done it again had he not been caught, he said, "Yes." He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 9 years to life. He was denied parole 10 times. He was then released in 2022 after 28 years. Derek's parents spent every one of those years fighting to keep him locked up. On August 2nd, wherever they are, they still get white ice cream with sprinkles. That's what Derek called vanilla. Joshua Phillips. For 7 days, an entire city searched for an 8-year-old girl, and she was under her neighbor's bed the whole time. On November 3rd, 1998, 8-year-old Maddie Clifton walked across the street to play with 14-year-old Joshua Phillips in Jacksonville, Florida. But she never came home. Police and volunteers searched for a week. Phillips joined the search. At one point, a sergeant entered Phillips's bedroom to question him. Phillips sat on his bed, petted his dog, and answered calmly. Maddie's body was underneath that bed the entire time. On November 10th, Phillips's mother noticed a wet spot on his floor. She lifted the base of the waterbed frame and found Maddie. Phillips said it started as an accident. They were playing baseball, and he hit her in the eye with the ball. She started bleeding and screaming. He panicked, not because she was hurt, but because his father was coming home. His father was violent and had strict rules. No children in the house, especially not girls. Phillips dragged her inside. He hit her with the bat to stop the screaming and stuffed her under his bed. When his father came home, he acted normal, then went back to his room. Maddie was still alive, moaning under the mattress. He lifted it, cut her throat, and stabbed her 7 times. Then he went to school the next morning, and the morning after that, every morning for a week, sleeping on top of the body of the girl he killed. Phillips was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. He was just 14. The prosecutor who put him away later said he had second thoughts. The sheriff who pushed for the sentence admitted, "I never got the feeling it was a malicious, calculated murder. It was an impulsive act that, given a different set of circumstances, would never have happened." Phillips is still in prison. Maddie's sister said it best. Maddie didn't get a second chance, and her killer's sentence should be final too. Mary Bell. Her mother tried to kill her before she could walk, and by the time she was 10, she was killing other people's children. Mary Bell was born in 1957 in Scotswood, one of the poorest neighborhoods in Newcastle, England. Her mother was a teenager who sold her body to survive and told nurses to take the thing away from her the moment Mary was born. She dropped her from a window, fed her sleeping pills, sold her to a stranger through an adoption agency. And what happened to Mary inside that house, behind closed doors, starting at the age of 4, was something the courts would later describe as among the worst child abuse ever documented in Britain. Mary never told anyone, but something inside her was building. At school, she tried to strangle classmates, stuffed sand into a girl's mouth, stubbed a cigarette on another child's cheek. The teachers noticed. They called the police, but nobody did anything. On May 25, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in a derelict house. Police couldn't determine a cause of death and ruled it an accident. The next day, she broke into a nursery and left notes. One read, "We did murder Martin Brown, you bastard." Police dismissed them as a prank. 2 months later, she strangled 3-year-old Brian Howe on a patch of wasteland. She carved the letter M into his stomach with a razor blade. She even mutilated his body with scissors. At Brian's funeral, a detective watched Mary standing outside as the coffin was carried out. She was laughing, rubbing her hands together. He later said, "I thought, my God, I've got to bring her in. She'll do another one." She was convicted of manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. She was just 11. She was diagnosed with psychopathic personality disorder. She served 12 years and was then released at 23 with a new name and lifetime anonymity. She has a daughter now, and a granddaughter. Neither name has ever been made public. The courts decided that the child who killed 2 boys deserved a second life, one that no one would ever be allowed to find.